Hello, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome everyone to MD Media's weekly show, the H panel. Today we'll be talking about current domestic and foreign affairs of Ethiopia. I'm happily joined by Faisal Roble, Itana Hapte, Duke Burbridge. Welcome, Duke, after a long time, Itana, after a long time. Welcome back.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Great. So we'll start with the first segment, the highlight of the week for each and every one of you. Duke, let's start with you. What's the highlight for you this week?
Well, as you know, I follow mostly the humanitarian conditions in Tigray, and there really wasn't a highlight. Um, they and that's the problem. There's not a lot of information coming out of Tigray right now. There's not a lot of stuff being monitored. Before the suspension, we had the Emergency Coordination Council reports. We had food cluster updates. Those continued after the suspension, but about a couple of months ago, they all went away. What we still have is data that shows the nutritional response. This is partial data, but what we're seeing is very alarming. I put this graph together that you see on the screen of the districts that are affected by drought, that were listed as being drought affected in Tigray. The Northwest is a partial list because they use a little bit of a different geography than the UN OCHA does. But you can see what the targets were for the number of children under 5 years old being treated for severe acute malnutrition. It was about 5,800 across all of these zones, just for those districts that were impacted by the drought. In March, that was being hit at about 80%. That's not bad. It's not good in the eastern zone where it looks like only a handful of people were getting help. But the central zone was doing pretty well. Northwestern zone was above their target, and you can tell in these in this graph, in the northwestern zone, it's above the target because you have a lot of people coming into districts. You have a lot of displacement still going on because at that time, there was still ethnic cleansing going on in the northern parts of the northwestern zone and the southern parts of the northwestern zone. That's also the same for the southern zone. But when you look at it, the last available month that we have data for, the number of people that are getting the number of children that are being admitted for severe acute malnutrition is under 1,000. This is around 5% of what the need is. This is very difficult to imagine that we're still calling this the humanitarian response at this point. How many children are being turned away? The severe acute malnutrition treatment is a last stage before starvation. It's a last ditch attempt to save the life of a child. And that gets worse, even from the fact that not as many people are getting help as were estimated to need help. Those estimates were made. It is my understanding that those estimates were made before the drought, before the food suspension, when none of those issues were at play. So the number that need help is probably much higher than what the estimate was in January. And they're still not able, or last January, I should say, and they're still not able to get anywhere close to that number. Now, what we're not seeing is good data, recent data about how much malnutrition is prevalent in Tigray. That's very frightening because the last report that we had was in August, and it found that there was that acute malnutrition was a severe consideration right now in Tigray, and that was prior to what would be the worst of the lean season. So what we have now is a failed harvest in many places. Some places, I'm sure the harvest was good, but in many places, a failed harvest because of the drought, because of the locusts, because of all of these conditions, because 1 million farmers were not able to be in their fields. And you have all of that happening, and we're still not monitoring what's going on with malnutrition in 2024. We're supposed to have food been distributed since November, since they said it was going to start early in December. We haven't seen much indication of that, although I'm getting some reports from the northwestern zone that says maybe food is getting out now, which would be a very, very happy thing. But we don't have good data. We don't have good data, but we do know that children are starving to death right now in Tigray, and that the international response to that crisis is very weak. And so we'll be looking for new numbers. Hopefully they'll come out this week. It's not irregular that they would be a little late for the December distribution. Hopefully more numbers will come out, but hopefully they will get their act together and they will start monitoring this situation, giving it the attention that it deserves. I'll talk a little bit more about that in my final word. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for this important update, Duke, as always. Faisal, what about you? What stood out for you this week?
Thank you very much. I think I will be brief. I think what stood out for me was what happened yesterday in Egypt, Cairo, in relation to other things that have happened last week in Uganda, Kampala. I think President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud of Somalia visited Cairo, had a very productive, quote unquote, conversation with al-Sisi of Egypt, who stood with Somalia on its role with Ethiopia at this point in time. I think the language that Sisi used is very, very important, to say, the least. And his word is, quote unquote, don't try Egypt or try to threaten its brothers, especially if they ask us to intervene. That is al-Sisi talking about what he's ready to do for Somalia in the event that Somalia asks. And literally, Somalia asked al-Sisi every possible help that he can give, including safeguarding the coast of Somalia against Prime Minister Abiy's threatening language, which we all are familiar with at this point in time. As you know, the IGAD conference, which took place in Kampala, not condemned, but stood with Somalia when it comes to the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Somalia. And the US envoy, Mike Hammer, really spoke very strongly, more than even what IGAD, said, by literally saying that not only does he also affirm Somalia's sovereign status, but at the same time that the US will not respect an MOU that Ethiopia signed with a region that's part of Somalia. That's how he put it, Somaliland, which is part of Somalia. And he said if anybody wants to enter some sort of deal with Somalia, it has to be with the federal government. And before that, John Kirby, who is the national security advisor to Biden, also spoke very well and went even further by saying that Ethiopia's deals with Somaliland is a national threat to the national interest of the United States of America. That, I think, also globalized the issue by America putting herself in the smack of the controversy between Somalia and Ethiopia and saying what's hurting Somalia is also hurting the United States national interest, not to mention the whole Al-Shabaab and everything. So, here is, a complete reversal of fortune, in the sense that Egypt used to be one of the strongest supporters of Somalia all the way from the 1950s, when Somalia was trying to get its independence, where Haile Selassie did everything under the earth to make sure that Somalia doesn't become independent. And even when independence was in the horizon, Haile Selassie tried by using the Allied forces that were victorious at the time to also ensure that the two Somalis don't get united. So between April of 1960 and May, June-ish 1960, within that period of time, Haile Selassie invited northern Somali leaders, what is now some call Somaliland, like 2-3 times, to ask them not to join with Somalia, but that didn't work. So where Egypt was the friend, Ethiopia was always the bellicose. But in the last few years, this is the sad story of the PP role. In the last few years, despite the 2006 role between Prime Minister Mallas's era and Somalia, but in the last 30 years that Somalia was broken down, Ethiopia probably played a productive role. At least what we know. What we don't know in terms of the intelligence and behind the back stages we don't know, but what we know in terms of the fight against Al-Shabaab, there was a good relationship, and that came on the heels of the 1990s. Before that, where Ethiopian and Somali intellectuals really engaged at the Horn Forum, which used to happen once a year, to really move away from the 70s confrontation to the 80s kind of, more understanding. What it appears now is PP literally trashed all that. The goodwill that had been developing between the two sides for the last decades, and the EPRDF policy of working with Somalia to the extent possible. Now, the PP policy has been what some people call straight aggression and undermining of Somalia's sovereignty. Now, for Somalis, and this is the talk that I've been hearing, they're very sad about what's happening, because they really think, in addition to the so-called annexation that PP is trying to do, there is a sinister role here to pit Somalis and Oromos one against each other, so that at least Prime Minister Abiy and his government will not worry another front in the east. So this is how Somalis are reading. In addition to the annexation, they really feel that there is a plan by Aret Kilo to create a wedge between Somalis and Oromos, who have been in good relationship within the last few years, and that seems a very dangerous role that Aret Kilo is playing. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. The topic we selected for today, the current domestic and foreign affairs of Ethiopia, I think will bring you back in terms of your view on what advisor of the Prime Minister, which sounds like, or maybe a clear reference to what Egypt said. So we'll talk about that. Thank you for that, Faisal. Itana, again, welcome. I know you are busy with organizing something big next week. So I'm glad you made it today. What stood out for you this week?
Thank you. What stood out for me this week is a continuation of conditions in Tigray and Oromia, and new developments of a kind of turmoil related to Ethiopia and the broader region of the Horn of Africa and Northeast Africa. In terms of Tigray, I would like to pick up where Duke stopped. He brought in substantive data, revealing, the breadth and depths of starvation in Tigray, to which no part of global community is paying a serious attention, despite the 1980s, despite the 1970s, when the state, after they didn't admit, but after it was revealed to the global community, there was a huge global rally in support of the famine that the global community observed in the country. It was one of huge aid mobilization in the history of the continent. And although hundreds of thousands of lives were lost, especially in the 70s, the global community marched in support of lives in the northern part of the country, and millions of lives were actually saved. Despite that background, today, the global community is not paying serious attention. I don't mean aid was not coming in like when the Tigray war was active. There is still limited amount of aid going on, as everyone knows, after the war, active war ceased. But that is far from enough. Far from enough at two levels. One, it didn't cover all of the areas it needs to cover. Second, after the Tigray war, the active phase of the war ceased, it developed the kind of starvation we have in Tigray, developed, escalated to famine. But the government in Addis is denying, when it has enough data, that there is any kind of famine in Tigray. Tigray interim administration made a statement. There is enough data that famine is unfolding in the eyes of Ethiopian peoples, in the eyes of African rulers or leaders, in the eyes of global community. Now, what does this mean? The story is not enough to know. We need to know the meaning of what we are talking about. What does it mean to see people dying of starvation when at least the continental structure believes that there is a government, there is a functioning state in Ethiopia, when the global community believes that Ethiopia is a functional state? What does it mean that hundreds of people die every week of starvation? We need to take a step back and remember of what happened during the Tigray War and the declaration that was made in connection to the beginning of the Tigray War. The regime in Addis Ababa and its allies declared in a very clear language that they want to erase Tigrayans from the face of the earth. That there is no doubt. They made this statement to European envoys. They made this statement to Ethiopian public. They made this statement to African diplomats. No one had hesitation about that. They were very clear. For me, the meaning is clear. The active war, when Addis Ababa fought Tigray by encircling it from all directions, denying any access to Tigray, denying Tigray connection to the globe or the world community, and fighting it from the ground and from the air, imposing restrictions of all kinds. Now there is a second phase of the war, which is targeting the same thing, the same people, and seeking to achieve the same goal, in my view. That is to erase Tigrayans from the face of the world. If this thing continues for a few months, there is no doubt that hundreds of thousands of people will die, which will lead to the collapse of Tigrayan demography. And that is what Addis Ababa clearly declared. And Addis Ababa is working that goal. I'm not saying this without any evidence. Remember the statement which were made twice from Addis Ababa. The statement did not say there is no famine. They didn't say so. They said, we have no evidence. They said, we have no evidence. That is to say, we are aware, if you want to ask us about facts, we are aware that people are dying of starvation in Tigray, but that is what we want. That's it. So this is what is going on in Tigray, and it's very disappointing to see, even the interim government of Tigray making just a statement about these things. For me, that is not enough. There is nothing to preside over for the interim government of Tigray after the collapse of Tigrayan demography. That is something imminent, in my view. So that is not enough. It's also not enough for international community. It is not enough for the segments of groups of people in Ethiopia who, trying to make some, develop some awareness, taking a step back from the craziness which was born during the Tigray War, that is, supporting Addis Ababa in whatever means to enable it to win over Tigray. People say we don't support war on Tigray today, as they did in the past 2 years, but the same thing is going on and no one is doing anything. And that is very disappointing for me to see and watch. I'm not doing anything, we are not doing anything, but this is very disappointing. Second, what is going on in Oromia is a bit similar, but active war is going on in Oromia. The war, which started even before the Tigray war, did not stop. It's not abating in any form. Schools are getting bombarded by drones every week, and this includes the Amara region. And what is worse about Oromia is the part of Oromia, particularly the western provinces, where the OLA insurgency took root when the kind of political transition that Addis Ababa began in a promising way collapsed. So in parts of West Wallaga, people are dying of malaria and a number of epidemics, and there is no support. And this is in addition to war. So this is what we have, despite the claim in the capital city. But the problem is a kind of new regional development that appeared, again, because of the creativity of Addis Ababa. Now, a new memorandum of understanding, I'll use the same name because there is no any other name for that, because they say this is memorandum of understanding where the Somaliland president entered into some kind of agreement with Addis Ababa guy. So that threatened Somalia's sovereignty, and it's creating a diplomatic debacle for the country and for many other countries. So I see people saying this is again a sovereignty of Somalia, and this is very bad for this country and that country. Again, I would say we need to know the meaning of what is going on again in this regard. This is not a simple threat against one country. It's a threat against continental structures, which were established by forefathers who established African states after decolonization. At independence, they agreed when they established Organization of African Unity that colonial boundaries would remain intact. Did they love that colonial boundary? No, but no one wanted the chaos. The example that Abiy Ahmed and his regime is setting from Addis Ababa is a very dangerous precedent for continental structures, because we have many other countries outside the continent of Africa. It's again a very bad precedent for global structures. So the government in Addis Ababa is threatening not just a single state, it's threatening global structure. This is a very bad precedent. Now, who is doing this and why? I hear and read people writing and speaking who is doing about this and why it's happening. So Abiy Ahmed is literally in charge of government in Addis Ababa today, and at least some regions in the country. And people say he does set people against one another. Amara against Tigray, Tigray against Amara, Oromo against Amara, Somali, and now Somali against Oromo, Oromo against Somali, to stay in power. But many governments in Ethiopia tried this at the lowest level, and we are aware of this in the history of modern Ethiopia. At the very lowest level, they tried this. But no one tried at the scale that Abiy Ahmed is doing, risking the very survival of the country's demography, risking the very national survival of the country, territorial integrity of the country, national unity of the country. So Ethiopia has today in Addis Ababa a leader who is self-declared as a king, but who does not care a bit about the country's national borders, who does not care about the country's sovereignty, who does not care about economic conditions of the country, and who never cares about security of people. For me, today, Ethiopia is under a force and a leader it has never seen in history. No leader in the history of modern Ethiopia did. What Abiy Ahmed and his government is doing at the same scale that he is trying. We know the Derg regime for what it was. We know the imperial state for what it was. And we know EPRDF for what it was. No one was courageous enough to go to a large-scale war with a single regional state and retreat after killing over 1 million civilians and say, oh, we did a very good thing. And we have no regret about that. No government in Ethiopia imposed a type of restriction that Abiy imposed today on Tigray, caused not drought, not a simple starvation, but famine, and make a bold governmental statement in Addis Ababa saying, I have no evidence that famine is going on in Addis Ababa. For me, we have in Addis Ababa today a terrorist in charge of state structure. I say this in full awareness of the meaning of terrorism and who is a terrorist. Only terrorists can do what Abiy is doing today, holding Ethiopian state structure as a hostage. It's not just the responsibility of Ethiopian opposition forces or Ethiopian public to get rid of this dangerous force today. It's responsibility of regional forces. It's responsibility of global forces. Abiy Ahmed and his government is a dangerous animal sitting in charge of a huge African state in the Horn of Africa.
Thank you, Itana. That actually gives us a good segue into the domestic affairs for the first part of our discussion. Talking about domestic affairs, Abiy Ahmed was busy this week in Addis, performing, or if you will, acting as the tourist guide for his ministers and the social media army. And this is a very short clip from a long, I think, three-part documentary from the state media.
ግን ተሸንሽኖ መሀል ላይ የሌለ ኮንክሪት ጠፍጥፏል። ብረት አለ። ብረት ውድ ነው። ኮንክሪት ውድ ነው። ለምን እንደዛ እንደሚደረግ አላውቅም። አሁንም ቀጥሎብን በምንሰራቸው መንገዶች በሙሉ እንደዛ ችግር አለ። መሀል ላይ ሲሚንቶ አላይታችሁ ከሆነ አላማው ግልጽ አይደለም። ብዙ ዓለም የምናየው ሰፋፊ መንገድ ነው። እኛ ጋር ደግሞ ተሸነሸነ ነው። እሱን ለመቀየር ቀረት መንገድ እያፈረስን ነው። ከመገናኛ ያለው ፈርሷል። ከዚህም ታያላችሁ ተወሰነ የፈረሰ አለ። አሁን ዋናው ግን ፈለኩበት ዋናው ምክንያት
He's taking his ministers to his palace project, aka Chaka project, explaining in the bus, like I said, to his ministers and
ድሮ ታስታውሱ ከሆነ ከአዲስ አበባ እዚህ ጋር መድረስ ማለት ዱከም ገባ ነው።
army.
በጣም እንትን ነው። አሁን እንግዲህ በካቻ
what are you reading domestically? What's happening? Itana alluded to what's happening in Tigray or Oromia, Amhara, in terms of war, including the foreign affairs. We'll come back to the foreign affairs. So if you zoom in into domestic issues, what are you reading in terms of Abiy Ahmed's Ethiopia?
Yeah, well, I think Etana and my other colleague, both of them really put out a very strong, persuasive case of why the Ethiopian government at this particular time is, quote unquote, to use a phrase used by Alex Diwal about 30 years ago in Somalia, a government at war with its own people. It's a government that's, killed million people, but now also the after effect of that war, famine, which the government is denying its existence, although we see daily people dying. And you compare that with this, plenty of food and platitudes that they are exchanging. It's just two worlds that Ethiopia now sees. I think Prime Minister Abiy is, in a way, trying to really hide the real picture of what's going on in Ethiopia. I shared this morning that Ethiopia is hurting deeper and more serious than what he is telling. For instance, in Djibouti, well, let me start with this one. This is the projection and comparison of 2018 to 2020, 24, 25.
28, yeah.
All the way to 28, but 25 and 24, and how the Ethiopian debt is skyrocketing. Basically, Abiy started with a small to the tune of 23 or 33, and very soon it will hit as high as $75 billion of a debt that the country would be under. I mean, add this to the fact that Tana and Duke were talking about in terms of the range of famine and drought and starvation. And contrast that to what you just showed us in terms of the video and the multi-billion-dollar palace that he's building. So that's one thing. Ethiopia hurting, its economy really on the doldrums, never seen before, with a skyrocketing kind of debt. But also, what we are not talking about is in the last 6 months, the Ethiopian government knew that it is import from Djibouti has been cut down by 1/3 of what it used to import. Basically, it is importing a lot less than what it is for two reasons. Number one, of course, there is no hard currency that it has. And number two, Djibouti streamlined its process and its dealing with the Ethiopian government so that there is no room for the Ethiopian importers to rely on their application and what they're bringing. So because of that, really, the import is also hurting. And some essential products that Ethiopia wanted to import is not coming there. The other issue is that I think, and very important, in terms of the Red Sea that Ethiopia lately started as a crisis issue, the insurance and the cost of the two big cargo carriers that come to the Red Sea have really raised their prices to a prohibitive level, where countries like Ethiopia can no longer feel comfortable to get cargoes from that because of two reasons. Number one, of course, the war in the Middle East has negatively impacted the Red Sea. And number two, Ethiopia's own action made its own suppliers such insecure that what used to come to Djibouti is no longer coming at the rate at which it used to come. So Ethiopia would be facing very soon, in addition to the 1/3 cut in terms of what it used to import from Djibouti, it would also face a very high cost to bring something in through Djibouti or even somewhere else. That really, tells you that the Ethiopian government at this point in time shot herself on the foot, because there was already a very serious crisis in the world. Instead of ameliorating the situation, it added more fuel to the fire. And now Ethiopia is partly destabilizing the Red Sea, the same way the Hutus and others are destabilizing the Red Sea. So basically, this will hurt Ethiopia. It may not hurt Somalia and coastal cities and countries, simply because those of us who know Somalian, 80% of what Somalia brings and more comes on small boats because its proximity to the Middle East and what have you. Ethiopia was depending on massive cargo shipments coming to Djibouti or to Berbera, and that's going to change. And I think when leaders within the Ethiopian government, such as Damek Mokonnen and President Sahle were talking about that Ethiopia is killing her own goals because of its ability to trump the very principles that Etana talked about, which were principles of good neighborly, protecting and preserving the rights of their neighbors as much as theirs, and trumping the OAU, or at this point in time, the AU's non-interference. Ethiopia literally hurted herself on the commercial aspect, which I talked about, but it also opened the door for other countries and other groups, like they did in the 1970s and 1980s, to no longer preserve Ethiopia's territorial integrity. And this could be a welcoming feast for Ola, for Western Somali Liberation Front, for Ogaden National Liberation Front, for Afar, and even for Tigray. And in the case of Tigray, it already really trembled by the time Abiy and his team invited Eritrea. The very step of, weakening Ethiopia's respect toward its territorial integrity was even violated within the Ethiopian context. Now it went out, as Etana said, and it's violating the regional countries' territorial integrity and sovereignty. So this is the most disastrous diplomatic effort and I have ever seen. I think I used to think that Ziad Barre's 1977 diplomacy, when he was told, talk to Ethiopia and do a different way than war. A lot of people used to think that was a disaster. But this one that Ethiopia and Abiy is doing is probably at a higher scale than anything that we have seen, in the sense that it's violating its own territorial integrity and sovereignty, but it's also creating a dangerous condition for the rest of, I was told that some Kenyan intellectuals are behind the scene questioning Ethiopia's reliability and predictability. What could they do tomorrow to Kenya? Suppose the Somali project doesn't work for them. Will they try the same thing at Lamu? Will they try the same thing at Eritrea? Or even tiny Djibouti, which is freaking out at this point in time and has no more respect for Ethiopia. 100 plus years of relationship between Djibouti and Ethiopia is on the doldrums today. Ethiopia really stands alone in the region. When you look at Sudan, Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Egypt, and South Sudan now that join. And very soon Somalia will try to invoke its membership with the East African community, which she is a member of, and also try to snatch Kenya out of the relationship that it used to have with Ethiopia. Ethiopia stands alone. Today, I read somewhere that Sudan exited IGAD. Somalia will soon exit IGAD. IGAD used to be an Ethiopian arm that it really used for its foreign policy in the region. And IGAD has been shattered. Eritrea is no longer strongly part of IGAD. Sudan is out. Somalia could be out. And if Somalia is out of IGAD, Djibouti will exit from IGAD. Ethiopia is back to where it has never been. And I don't know how it's going to get out unless it really rolls back the MOU, tries to open new chapter with Somalia. And it will take many years to revive Ethiopia's public standing, as much as the war that it created in Tigray. And we talked about this in this venue some time ago. Even after the cessation of hostility, the impact created in Eritrea is a generational problem. It's not going to be in 5 years, 10 years. It will be a generational. What Abiy and his team did in the Horn of Africa today is also a generational problem and a decline in diplomatic relationship that we used to think would work. And it's a very sad story to really narrate here with our audience.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. Duka, I just want to come to you in terms of, we remember when Abiy Ahmed came to power almost 6 years ago. One of the first things he did was to bring Eritrea's Isaias from the cold in terms of diplomacy, sanctions, all that. And there are some Eritreans who are saying that the rate at which Abiy Ahmed is taking Ethiopia to where Eritrea was is not even comparable to, it took decades for Eritrea to be in that situation. So my question to you is, how are you reading Washington, Addis, Asmara, all these regional capitals there, including Cairo, what we heard yesterday, and as Faisal alluded to in terms of Al-Sisi saying. What's your reading, Luke?
Well, yeah, I think that the United States really has a job on their hands. I don't envy Mike Hammer for about the millionth time. I don't envy the job that he has right now and how that's spiraling. And I mean, with Abiy, you notice that there are no more international monitors on human rights. He's demonstrated, or the international community really has demonstrated, that they're willing to allow him to do just about anything to the people of Ethiopia. Now, how far that's going to extend, of course, people get very nervous when you talk about, annexing or recognizing an area that, that looks like foreign interference in a neighboring country. That's when the international community usually stands up at that point and says, you can't do that. You can only screw around with your own country and mess up your own country. Don't try to do this to other countries, unless you're Eritrea, of course. But what we're looking at, what we're seeing, sadly, has been a descent back into the bad old days of, and you see it not only with the situation where Ethiopia appears to be encroaching on Somali's sovereignty, but you also see it in the famine denial. I mean, this is how famines were announced historically in Ethiopia. A government official would come up in front of the camera and say, "There's no famine." That's basically how they were announced. You're not going to get the government to go out and say that it's happening until there's proof. But of course, as the gentleman was saying, that this is the international community doesn't respond to proof or evidence anymore. It appears that way. So we have set up Abiy. I mean, as much as we can. I'm not trying to say that the United States is, has pushed him or pulled him or doesn't. But as much as we can influence, our influence has not been very constructive. Not for the people of Ethiopia, not for the people that are being hurt by the decisions he's making. And yeah, it seems like he's taking Ethiopia into. I want to say that it's regressing back to where it was during some of the authoritarian regimes that they've had, but it's almost a new direction. I mean, I may be wrong about this. My long-term history of the region might be a little compromised, but to start this problem with Somalia, to start all of this on the basis of they don't have a port, they haven't had a port for decades. It seems like we've empowered Abiy to sort of focus on whatever he thinks will keep him in power, which is a very dangerous thing. When this idea of staying in power is more important than the lives of the people that you're supposed to be ruling. That's what we've done. That's what the Europeans were quicker to do it than we were even. There were a lot of people that were very quick to rehabilitate his image and to sort of brush aside horrible human rights violations that we had to brush aside our commitment to human rights to sort of accommodate. But we were willing to do that. The United States was willing to do that. And this is the inevitability of somebody misusing the power that they got through having crimes against humanity and genocide forgiven by the international community is always going to be, it's always going to be used poorly. We have very short-sighted views on East Africa, the Horn of Africa, and Africa in general, on most of the world in general. And I'm not sure that it's because we have a lack of critical thinking or foresight, or if it's because we just don't really care. And that's sadly what I think is going on, is that the United States and Europe, they don't really care if human beings are suffering in Ethiopia, if human beings are suffering in Somalia. They've cut humanitarian assistance in Somalia, just as they've cut it in Tigray and elsewhere in Ethiopia. So this is where this, I guess, realpolitik, but it's more just appeasement. This is where our appeasement has left us. And we don't have, we are influential in a sense, but in reality, there's not much we can do to influence somebody that we've already let get away with murder on such a grand scale.
Great. Thank you, Duke, for that. Itana, maybe this is a time where we should a bit briefly talk, let you talk about what will happen next weekend. I will display the flyer and you can speak to that. So, for those from Ethiopia, this is, I think, the year. 50 years ago this year happened the Ethiopian Revolution, and Itana is working on an international symposium. Itana, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to lecture. So it's over 2 years since I started working on this project to bring together specialist scholars who studied the Ethiopian Revolution of 1974 from various perspectives. So this time it succeeded, and on January 26th and 27th, 20 scholars of various perspectives, of course, and different interpretations of what Ethiopia went through over the last 50 years since the eruption of the 1974 revolution, will present their research papers. Very big names are here, so we invite everyone to tune in and listen the presentations. And on 26th, it starts at about 2 p.m. Eastern time until about 8 p.m. On the second day, it starts at 8 a.m. It's again Eastern time until about 8 p.m. So a total of 6 panels and 20 presentations. So it's going to be a stimulating and engaging conversation. Scholars who studied the 1974 revolution, including through observation. Some of them were in Ethiopia when the revolution first erupted. Of course, like I said earlier, some of us look at the Ethiopian revolution as an event, and some scholars look at it as a continuous process since then. So we will be fortunate to have this, and Ethiopia will be on spotlight in Miami next week. And we invite everyone to tune in and attend the presentations as much as they can. And there will be a live streaming of the event between the times that I stated earlier. And there is, of course, registration that enables you to get in and participate, listen to the presentations, and it's available online. If you Google this name, the Ethiopian Revolution of 1974, 50 years on, you will see a link that enables you to register for the conference. And we have a very interesting map on the flyer, a flyer that has a map overlaid, a map of multinational federal Ethiopia overlaid by the imperial state and the Derg regime administrative map. So many people and many offices at the University of Miami supported realizing this symposium, and I thank them all. So the submissions of these 20 chapters will result in an edited volume in about a year. And thank you.
Great. So for our viewers, I have shared on the comment section the Eventbrite link that you can use to register. And we are looking at the possibility of streaming it live as well here on the UMD Media. The 2 days, it's conflicting with another event that will streamline, but I think we will stream live, so we will arrange that. Thank you, Itana, for that. While you are on that, so one of the domestic issues that you mentioned, the Oromia, OLA, and the drone attacks and so on. So I think when we covered this maybe few weeks ago or months ago, there was this second round of negotiation happening in Dar es Salaam, which failed. But there are people who are saying there may be another round soon. I think the chief of staff might have mentioned even as the last chance to do that. So my point is, using that as a springboard, do you see any sign of abating, any sign of coming to sense when it comes to the domestic conflicts? And I was showing this map of Tigray for our viewers. That is a map showing 40% of the land area still is not under the control of the interim government. So around 100, I think 146 local administrations in all these zones, in the western, in south, in northern and northeastern Tigray, they are still either under Eritrean forces or Amhara forces. So even talking about famine, all this is the data that they have is what they can control. We don't even know there. So Itana, my point is, do you see anything happening in terms of Arakilo coming to its senses and address these multiple problems everywhere in the country?
You raised a very good context about the Pretoria Accord. Is Pretoria Accord alive today? I don't believe so. I don't believe Pretoria Accord is alive. It's dead. Maybe it is not buried, but I believe it is dead. Because all the promises we have read in the paper, which was published in public, is not realized. What was realized was gun was silenced, and that is a huge achievement, particularly for Tigrayans at home and overseas. Many people were in war zone while not in Tigray because of their loved ones. So that was substantial. But when we look at the agreement that was entered between the two forces, I don't think it is alive. And the best example is the territorial integrity of Tigray, which was constitutionally guaranteed, but not under Tigray interim administration today. So Addis Ababa did this deliberately and very consciously. And I think it does this with a huge investment in terms of money and human resource. It's a very organized work. It's not a mistake. It's not inability. It's not a mistake. It's a very well designed, organized, funded project of keeping several parts of Tigray out of the Tigrayan administration. So this is a very good context to look into. If this happened to Tigray after internationally sanctioned agreement, which was signed in Pretoria and followed with military detailed arrangement in Nairobi, what would come out of the potential negotiation between OLA and Abiy Ahmed's government? I am not optimistic for a number of reasons. So one reason is what happened last time in Dar es Salaam. Looking closely at what happened in Dar es Salaam in its aftermath gives a very good sense of the intentions of Abiy Ahmed and his colleagues. No, they did not offer the slightest possible negotiation item. One, they did not do, because when they issued the statement, they said OLA brought to a table a backward question raised in the 1960s and which was already realized. So in the perspective of Abiy Ahmed and his colleagues, there is no political demand of substance to negotiate with the political forces in Oromia, particularly with OLA. So what happened at Dar es Salaam? They demanded that the chief commander of the OLA forces must show in Dar es Salaam, which he did. If I would have been asked to advise, it's not right to do so. I mean, from the perspective, from the point of view of OLA leadership, that was a debacle. It was a serious mistake. It was a serious miscalculation. But I believe that Abiy Ahmed's a close friend, Workana Gabayo, who is now in the leadership in a key position of IGAD, brought together diplomats, convincing the OLA overall commander to bring him out of his military base in Western Oromia in a way that he could not return again. In short, what happened in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, and in the aftermath was cutting off the leadership, the top leadership of OLA, not a negotiation. That was one thing. Second, what the regime demanded was a surrender of OLA forces, which I think is quite unlikely without realizing at least some parts of the demands, which Abiy Ahmed and his friends believe is none. So the most important point which you want to look into when you consider the potential of success between the negotiation between Abiy Ahmed and OLA is what is Oromia for Abiy? For Abiy Ahmed, Oromia is a power base. So allowing significant political force to operate in Oromia for Abiy Ahmed is immediately or in few years is the admission of leaving the state power. Today, there is no opposition office open in Oromia. There is none, except in Finfinne. There is literally none. During the time of the so-called national election, there were no any opposition office open in Oromia. So for Abiy Ahmed to allow Oromo Liberation Army or any political organization which carries organic national demands of Oromia is to admit to leave power, because he is using Oromia as a power base at gunpoint. So I am not optimistic, but I still wish very, very much that this civilians are caught in the crossfire. School children were bombarded, have been bombarded every week by drone. Civilians were suffering from epidemics and serious killing diseases like malaria, and there is no support for this. Of course, the regime wants this. So looking at all this crisis, I wish and very much wish the success of this kind of negotiation, which people say the third round may come up. But when you look into the reality, I mean, it's unlikely.
Thank you, Itana, for that. It's the reality on the ground. Faisal, I was alluding to the Red One's response and how, in terms of the global, from missing a meeting of IGAD, not going to African Union Security. I think the last minute they had to go and speak there. I think they sent a delegation. There are reports that say the US pushed for that. But in any case, how are you looking at Ethiopia's response to the international and regional reaction to what is happening in the country in terms of Somaliland and the MOU? Faisal.
Thank you. I just want to take a minute to really congratulate and recognize Etana's hard work on this conference that he has been organizing. I'm a bit briefy of his work in this area, and it's huge, and the who is who of Ethiopian studies, if you will, are attending and presenting papers. So it's a great effort and a great feat that Etana has done. So a job well done to my colleague. Yes, I think the one that the U.S. Pressured the Ethiopians to participate was the AU's security meeting,
Yeah, Peace
which
and Security Council. Yeah.
Security Council, which they attended, but they said they will attend without presenting anything because they said they don't have any report, even the MOU, even general diplomatic presentation where they could have gone there and just spoke. But I think behind the scene, the U.S. said you have to be there. You are you have issues, and you created stir in the region, so they attended. But when it came to IGAD, they completely boycotted, so to speak, and basically they tried to work through the hand of Workine Gabeyo, who is Abiy's protege in many ways, and who really, from what I'm hearing from Somali circles, crossed the boundaries of being a secretariat. He even wanted to draft the communique in the dark. And if you saw some commotion, some of the pictures, that's where Somalis were saying, hey, you don't call the shots. This is a communique to be written by two sides and the secretariat on one side. So it was just a sad story, the way the PP team, in conjunction with Burkina Gabeyo, behaved. Prior to the meeting, to the Kampala meeting, Abiy requested he called President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud about 7 times to talk and do his magic. And basically, President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud turned down the request and the telephone calls, didn't want to talk. When they reached Kampala, Prime Minister Abiy reached out to Museveni and Ruto to have them bring in Hassan and him talk. Basically, from what I understand, President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud told both of them, particularly Museveni, I respect you. You did an excellent job to host all of us, but I'm not going to waste my time to sit down with this man who doesn't even understand that he is invading another country by, breaking the oldest principle that ties us together. And Museveni said to Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, I understand, and really didn't put any pressure. The same with Ruto. So, they came to Kampala a day after for the non-aligned movement. And basically that one is, as we understand, some general picture of, what those non-aligned countries would like to see in the world and stuff like that. But initially, Abiy interjected his alibi about not being able to develop his economy unless he gets a cost. And he said the port and access to the sea is important. And that's when the deputy prime minister of Somalia came harsh on him and said, basically, for the lack of the better word, that he's on the highway for robbery. And basically said Somalia will not accept, and that's where the no inch movement is coming. Somalia will not accept any talks before he rolls back the MOU. So between, I think, 4 days ago and now, again, more dancing with the MOU and the language is coming from Addis Ababa. I think, was it Addis Standard or Herald, where finally the Ethiopian government is saying there is no MOU per se. There are no articles to the MOU. And in terms of the recognition, we have to study and assess. That's a huge hole that says, And this morning, out of the blues, Ridwan just, tweeted like 8 times in sequence, starting and saying that the relationship between Ethiopia and Somalia is one even bigger than one neighborly relationship. It's blood, it's cultural, it's brotherhood. And he goes on and on and on and says that where were other countries like Egypt when we were protecting Somalia and helping Somalia to fight Al-Shabaab? Very infantile kind of really tweets, knowing that Somalia has already marked the red line and even ready to take any measures as long as that MOU is on the table. So whether this is, again, and I tweeted back on his page, whether this is the typical confuse or convince, and they are trying to play the game thinking that Somalis are not very apt when it comes to Ethiopian, shenanigans. I don't know, but I think the people that I talked to were just making a mockery out of Ridwan's response. But some insiders called me and told me that it could probably be, and this is not sure, it could probably be a change of direction with the PP, knowing the pressure coming from all over. As you know, Mike Hammer left Kampala and he's on his way to Addis. And from Addis, he will be coming to here, probably meeting with some Somali gurus, from what I understand, and other Ethiopians to let them know that really, as much as America has been friend to Ethiopia, this is a red line also for the United States of America, that there is no interest in America to see the PP government breaking the rules and regulations of the international. So I think it's, as I started with my, it is a disastrous public policy that and diplomacy that Ethiopia took. As of this afternoon, we are hearing that there was a sort of confrontation, armed confrontation between the Ethiopian National Defense Forces and some Somaliland communities. And as you recall, the west is the area where Ethiopia wants to have the access. The east is the Sol Senag Ain, which has not been part of Somaliland. The middle is where the one tribe that supports Musa Bihi is. And the clash took place in the pocket where President Musa Bihi comes from. Particularly, it's within the district of Hargeisa. So it looks like within Hargeisa and the narrow confines of Somaliland, there's again two major splits. There is only one faction within even the greater Isaq family that's now supporting Musa Bihi, and that's the Habar Awal to a certain extent. The Garhajis, which are the more warrior kind of type, that includes some of the big names, including the ones that border on the Ethiopian side, are the ones who really conflicted with the Ethiopian National Defense Force. And that is not telling good story for Musa Bihi and Abiy. Despite the bigger Somalia, despite the two edges, Audal and SSC, that really not even both the issue. Even the problem with the PP is now emanating from the very core family and district of Musa Bihi. So there is no constituency for what they did, particularly both in Ethiopia, as Etana was saying, among the Oromo communities who really share a lot of cultural, economic, social, political relationship with the Somalis. I mean, you talk from Harar to Bale to Arsi, the two communities are so integrated that the worst case scenario that you would see is to spoil that relationship. There is no buy-in of this in Tigray. There is no buy-in of this even in the Amara region, who are really the most vocal against the PP on this issue. So outside the confines of Abiy's, entourage, I don't see there is a political mileage in this, and it's just a loser's game. And I hope he doesn't act on us as he did act on Tigray or other place or Oromia, because nobody thought that in 2018, when the first gun was shot in Oromia, it would be a 5-year-old war that really, as I said this morning, burned Oromo fertile grounds to the ashes. That's what you have. The most fertile region in Ethiopia, what I call the belly of Ethiopia, has been burned to ashes today. So we are in a bind for this. I don't know how we can get out. I think America has been playing, I just had my notes here, which I forgot. I think the West, as you guys say, let Abiy get away with murder, million of people, and siege, and the largest rape scale in the continent, as far as we know. I think America also let Abiy get away with having anyone to be responsible for what happened. No one, we don't know. And then also the State Department went along with Abiy to trash and literally eliminate the international transitional justice request, defund that effort, and basically accept the white paper that Red Kilo did on how to dialogue, and no transitional justice, no accountability, no transparency. Basically, there is an ambassador level at the State Department who is working with Abiy's office to make sure that A, there is no transitional justice the way we want, and B, that the national dialogue would be a screen that will be given to the Ethiopian people as if the issues have been. So America is choosing its own battle in this one, at least as Duke said. But when Abiy went out of the Ethiopian confines, you see a little bit of a, noise here and there. But the Ethiopian people have been forgotten.
Thank you, Faisal. Just briefly, maybe you can take 1 minute each to have your final thoughts. Itana, to your point, about Pretoria, Tigrayans in Europe held a demonstration in Brussels on that one. Just briefly, while I play that on the background, your final thoughts, Itana. Just maybe 1 minute.
Yes, I'll be brief. In light of what I said at the beginning, I call on every responsible human to look into what is going on in Tigray. The days of people before our own eyes is that part of humanity. So I call on everyone to respond. This is just part of humanity, and it requires only to be human to reach out to Tigray and do whatever we can, every one of us can, and what is happening also in Oromia. So let me be clear, and I have been saying this for over 5 years now. Ethiopia's problem is very complex and deep-rooted, and I don't believe it would be resolved in a week or two or even in few years. But if we put problems in priority, there is a monster that is eating Ethiopia alive, setting its people against one another, expanding conflicts, creating new ones, and living on all sorts of violence. That is a single person, Abiy Ahmed Ali. As long as Abiy Ahmed is in governmental seat, a terrorist being regarded as a leader, as long as he is in power, Ethiopia will continue to suffer from various images, various forms of the same situation it is now. The neighboring countries will continue to share the problems because there will be spillover, like we are seeing on Somaliland and Somalia now. So the focus of solution must be on this immediate problem. So I put Ethiopia's problem in steps and in ranks. Number one, and the most urgent one, is the removal of Abiy Ahmed. He must be removed to have peace in Ethiopia. He must be removed for people of Tigray to survive, for various peoples in Ethiopia to survive, for the country to restore its peace and its diplomatic relations, peaceful, harmonious relations with neighboring countries. If you choose to have Abiy in office, like Faisal said now, like the West looks at it, the problem will continue. So the problems that we are explaining is related to Abiy Ahmed directly, and it emanates out of his own office. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Duke, final thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to spend my final thoughts talking about one section of the population in Tigray that has not been very well cared for, and that's the displaced people inside Tigray. The rollout of food that was supposed to happen in December doesn't look like it happened, but they set a video on December 28th, the UN OCHA did, to show here's a displaced mother who got food and she thinks that the food distribution is great. And there was a woman and they were having an interview, and God bless her. And I'm glad that she's got food and that she's happy with the food distribution system. She happened to be a resident of the Sabakere displacement camp in the capital of Mekelle. You might know that camp from being the one camp that every single politician that goes to Tigray visits. Every single time you see a picture of a foreign official in a displacement camp, it's at that camp. That's one of 59 camps in Tigray that has on-site food distribution. There are 667 displacement camps in Tigray. Her experience, well, thank God she's getting food. Is that indicative of the displaced people of Tigray? I don't think so. Or else why would they still be talking about the same camp, things going well at the same camp? There are people starving to death in these camps. The neglect of the displaced people of Tigray has turned displacement camps into death camps, into starvation camps. They haven't been reached with non-food items. They haven't been reached with food items. Most of the times they don't even, there's not even a distribution point near them. There's not a distribution point on site. We need to take this seriously because this is, they've revised the estimates, and now that there's about 1 million people, they are not getting care. They are living on donations from the host community, and anybody from Tigray can be proud of that fact that the community are the ones keeping these guys alive, these families alive, and they're doing as good a job as they can. But when you shut down food assistance to the community, even if you're not serving the people in the displacement camps, even if you're just serving the community, when you shut down food to the community, you shut down food to the displacement camps because they have less food to then give to the people that are there. The people that are in these camps have nowhere to go. Their homes are occupied. Their territories occupied. Their fields were not plowed by them. They were plowed by the people that stole their land, or not plowed at all. They've been traumatized. They've been sitting in status for years in some cases. Some of them didn't go home in between the invasions. They are sitting there waiting for the international community to do something about it. And if we're going to say that we have a humanitarian response for Tigray, we have to be looking at human beings that are in these camps, that are registered to these camps, and getting no assistance whatsoever. That is a shame on our system. And these are the people, these are the families that it never should have stopped for. They know where these people are. They know where their families are. They know where the children are. They're not getting served by the acute malnutrition. They're not getting served by the hospitals that are taking care of that. They're not getting served. The pregnant, lactating women are not getting treatment. They are being ignored. And this has to end. We cannot pretend that these guys don't exist, that these families don't exist. There are tens of thousands of children who are starving right now, and we've just ignored them from the United States. We've pretended like they didn't exist. And this is something that has to stop. And the government of Tigray needs to be more forthcoming about the conditions of people in Tigray, about the conditions of the people who are starving in the districts that are affected by drought, but also in the districts that aren't affected by drought. If there is 60% of Tigray is occupied by the interim government, then they need to be giving reports. They should be doing briefings every week. That's been brought up every week. It's been brought up that they should be doing briefings every week, but it's never happened. They've shut down the Emergency Coordination Council reports. The UN OCHA reports are now just regurgitating data that's been given to them by the federal government, a government with credible accusation of weaponized starvation. They're providing the information on who's starving. It's nonsense. They need to take this seriously. If they don't take this seriously, as I said last time, if they don't take this seriously, I have no idea why the interim government exists. So this is something that the US government has to take seriously. If we're going to be helping with humanitarian aid, Europe needs to take seriously, the entire world needs to take seriously, but also the government of Tigray needs to take this seriously. I can't get any answers about what's going on in Tigray right now as far as the humanitarian conditions. I don't think anybody can. That needs to end. They need to look at the needs of the people. They need to care for the needs of the people. And that's my final thought. I think it'll be a great conference, by the way.
Great. Thank you, Duke, for that. Faisal, final thought. I just want to you as well on this one. This is the only picture that we saw Abiy meeting the Eritrean foreign minister in Kampala. If you want to comment on that as well, but your final thoughts, Faisal.
Yeah, I saw this picture and I couldn't really read very closely, except to say that if you really interpret the body language, it's the Eritrean delegation that's trying to go out of his way to reach out to Abiy, because this is always Abiy who's touching people's body. That's what the one we know. But this one, it's totally different. But having said that, I think unless things change, Eritrea is in the same camp with Somalia and Sudan and Egypt. And I think there is a significant number of troops that Eritrea has trained for Somalia. And between now and the time the MOU came out, they have met several times. I also feel that pro-Eritrean Somali activists are back in the scene, basically articulating support for the position of Somalia's, Somali government. I think there is a resignation in the Somali community, particularly the Somali government and its leaders, that with Abiy, war is imminent. I think everybody here, particularly Etena, expressed the knowledge surrounding about what Abiy can do and who he is and all that. And I totally endorse that. When the Tigray war started or is about to start, we all believed that the federal government under Abiy will use some pressures to bring TPLF and the Tigray administration closer to some sort of negotiation, for example, by stopping their budget, by using other measures. We didn't know that such a large scale of war would be unleashed on a region that's part of Ethiopia. I think Somalis know about this. I think there is no illusion on the part of Somalis that Abiy is capable to do what he did to Tigray. Actually, I used to have a cliche when people from Somali regional government would label me as a TPLF supporter, which I wasn't, but help, speaking like all we're speaking here for people not to be killed. I used to say that if Abiy, who was trained, raised, and prepped by TPLF, who speaks their language fluently, who is also sharing with them the same religion, if he can do that to Tigray, imagine what he could do to the Somalis. I think that's my fear. If he did that to Oromia, the region, quote unquote, his constituency, if he is doing to the Amara, the very Fanos that has supported him in that unjust war against Tigray, if he did what he has done to Tigray, Somalis has no illusion whatsoever that he will do 10 times worse than what he did. We could see Abiy literally leveling some regions and some areas, and the very victims of Abiy would be Hargeisa and northern Somalia or Somaliland. Because once he walks in and people start, challenging him, he will unleash the venom that he had and the venom that he used with his own people in Ethiopia. So the prospect is bad, but I hope we don't go to that position. And that's why I hope that he may come to his sense to roll back this MOU, which is at this point in time a one-pager with no articles, no nothing, no guarantee. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Faisal, Duke, and Itana for your time and as usual for your insight. And this is something that will follow through in coming episodes as well. Itana, best wishes with the upcoming symposium and see you there. See you next week, everyone. Good night.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye. We'll sign off by showing the Tigrayans rally protest calling for the full implementation of the Pretoria Agreement and for accountability in Ethiopia, specifically in Tigray.
ገበነኛታት ናፍር ድንበር ስልጣና ይግቦምን